Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story, so this happened last Sunday. I'm between jobs right now, but I've been keeping myself busy by helping out family and friends, giving rides, helping with moves, that sort of thing. I generally consider myself a pretty generous person. Last weekend, my younger brother Alex finally got a few days off work and was heading up to a lakeside cabin with some friends to celebrate a birthday. He asked me about 3 weeks ago if I could drive him there since he had culinary school that morning and wouldn't be able to catch a ride with his friends as originally planned. I told him, sure, no problem. When the day arrived, I picked him up early since his class finished sooner than expected, and we hit the road. The drive wasn't bad, about an hour and a half, and we just talked and listened to music the whole way. Alex was excited about the weekend ahead. "Thanks for doing this, Sam," he said as we cruised down the highway. "The guys would have left without me for sure." "That's what siblings are for," I replied. Besides, I didn't have anything better to do. It was around 4:30 p.m. by the time I dropped him off at a gorgeous wooden cabin overlooking the lake. I waved goodbye and turned around to head home. I made it about halfway back when I noticed someone parked on the shoulder frantically waving to flag down passing cars. Several vehicles ahead of me had already driven by without stopping. Being the helpful person I am, I decided to pull over. Big mistake. Enter entitled mother and her terror of a child. "Can I help you?" I asked, rolling down my window. The woman looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance as if I was bothering her. No, we ran out of gas." I was confused. I thought maybe you needed some help. Is everything okay?" "I just told you," she snapped. "We ran out of gas." "Oh, okay. That's a pretty easy fix," I said, trying to stay positive. I knew the next town had a gas station since I'd passed it on my way up. It was only about 3 miles up the road. "I can drive you into town to get gas and bring you back here," I offered. "Okay," she said flatly, as her son, who looked around 8 or 9, began picking up gravel from the roadside and throwing it into traffic on a 60 miles per hour highway. "Hey, don't do that, buddy. It's dangerous," I called out to him. The woman had gone to her car to grab her purse but whipped around when she heard me speak to her son. "Don't you dare speak to my child like that," she shouted, storming back toward me. "Sorry," I mumbled, already regretting my decision to stop. I got back into my car, followed quickly by the obnoxious pair. At this point, I felt I couldn't back out since I'd already committed to helping them, difficult as they were being. As soon as she sat down, the woman scoffed and looked at the floor of my car. "Why is your car so dirty?" "Oh, sorry," I replied. "I used to keep my work boots down there, so it got kind of dirty over time." "You could clean it up, you know?" she said with a tone dripping with judgment. I laughed nervously and just nodded, pulling away and wishing this would be over as quickly as possible. I'd left my phone in the center console, and without asking, she grabbed it. "Can I call someone? My phone ran out of battery. That's why we were stuck out there," she said, already punching in numbers. "Oh yeah, go ahead," I said, not really minding since I have unlimited calls. For some reason, she decided to shout her entire conversation, as if the person on the other end couldn't hear her otherwise. Meanwhile, her son suddenly leaped up between the front seats, peering out the windshield. I quickly slowed down, startled by his sudden movement. "Whoa, put your seatbelt on, dude," I said firmly. The mother glanced at him briefly and pushed him back into his seat with one hand while continuing her loud conversation. "Jason, sit down!" she barked, before returning to her call. "No. We're getting a ride from some stranger. Should be back soon." I had to remind the kid, Jason apparently, to put on his seatbelt a second time before he actually did it. By this point, I was seething inside, but thankfully I could see the town up ahead. She finished her conversation and tossed my phone back into the console without a word of thanks. When we pulled up to the gas pump, she just sat there with her arms folded, giving me these quick sideways glances. I didn't even have to ask. I knew she expected me to pump the gas for her. Then a thought crossed my mind. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I wanted to try. I got out of the car and grabbed a 5-liter jerry can from the display, holding it up for her approval. She nodded from inside the car. After filling it, I walked up to the passenger side and opened the door. "What?" she asked, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Oh, I just wondered if your son wanted to pick out an ice cream," I said. "It's pretty hot today." For the first time, her face softened into something resembling a smile. The kid practically launched himself out of the car, and to my delight, she followed him into the store. I walked in behind them and placed the jerry can on the counter, while Jason quickly selected an ice cream from the freezer. "Mom, can I get the Rocket Pop?" Jason asked, bouncing on his toes. "Fine, but hurry up," she replied, tapping her foot impatiently. "Oh, 1 second," I said casually. I left my phone in the car and my debit card is in the case. I smiled as soon as my back was turned to them, got into my car, and drove away at a normal pace, savoring the sight of her running out of the gas station, screaming what I can only assume were colorful profanities. "Come back here, you absolute piece of—" Her voice faded as I accelerated onto the highway. All in all, it only cost me about 20 minutes of my time, but the feeling I got as I drove away was priceless. I wonder how long it took them to get back to their car. I got home without any issues and had a fantastic story to share with my family. Best drive ever. I just hope the poor cashier at the gas station didn't have to deal with too much fallout from that nightmare of a human. I wasn't sure if I should post this here or in Our Entitled Parents since it fits both. Let me know if I should move it. I've mostly been lurking on these subreddits, enjoying stories about justice being served, and I finally got some of my own. The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened about 2 years ago, and I'm still amazed at how spectacularly my neighbor managed to shoot himself in the foot. I've been living in my house for about 8 years now, and it's always been my dream home. Decent-sized lot, quiet neighborhood, and best of all, this beautiful row of mature oak trees along the property line that gave us perfect privacy from our next-door neighbor. The neighbor in question moved in about 3 years ago. Let's call him Entitled Neighbor, or EN for short. From day one, this guy was a piece of work. He drove this obnoxiously loud sports car, threw parties that went way too late, and had this general attitude like the whole world owed him something. But for the most part, I kept to myself and tried to be neighborly. The problem started last spring when EN decided he wanted to build this massive deck on the back of his house. Now, his backyard faced toward the mountains, which would have been a gorgeous view, if not for my oak trees. These trees were easily 40 feet tall, probably 60 years old, and they sat right along our shared property line. They were mostly on my side, but a few branches hung over into his yard. One Saturday morning, I was out in my garden when EN came stomping over. He had this fake friendly smile plastered on his face, but I could tell he was worked up about something. "Hey there, neighbor," he said, trying to sound casual. "I wanted to talk to you about those trees." I wiped my hands on my gardening gloves and stood up. "What about them?" "Well, I'm building this new deck, and those trees are really blocking what could be an amazing mountain view. I was hoping we could work something out." I looked over at the trees. They were healthy, beautiful, and provided amazing shade and privacy for both our properties. Work something out how? "I was thinking you could have them cut down. I'd even be willing to split the cost with you 50-50. I almost laughed. These trees were one of the main reasons I bought this house. "Sorry, but I'm not interested in cutting them down. I love those trees." His friendly mask started to slip a little. "Come on, be reasonable. They're just trees. You could plant new ones." "These trees are 60 years old. New ones wouldn't provide the same privacy or shade for decades." "Privacy from what? We're neighbors, and you could get some of those fast-growing trees." I shook my head. The answer is no. I'm not cutting down my trees. Ian's face was getting red now. "Look, I'm trying to be nice here. Those branches hanging over my property are technically on my side anyway. A few small branches, maybe. The trees themselves are on my property." I checked the property lines. Some of those trees might actually be on my side. This was getting ridiculous. "If you want to trim branches that are hanging over your property line, that's your right. But you can't cut down the trees." He stormed off, muttering something about property values and being unreasonable. I figured that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. Over the next few weeks, Ian kept bringing it up. He'd catch me getting my mail or working in the yard and make these passive-aggressive comments about the trees. He started talking about how much his property value would increase with a mountain view, how the trees were probably diseased anyway, how they dropped leaves in his yard. I just kept politely declining and went about my business. Then he escalated. He started researching local ordinances and calling the city about everything he could think of. He reported me for having overgrown vegetation, which the city inspector laughed off since the trees were healthy and well-maintained. He tried to claim they were a fire hazard. Nope. He even called about noise complaints, claiming the trees made too much noise in the wind. The city basically told him to pound sand on that one. I was getting pretty fed up with his harassment, but I figured he'd eventually give up. That's when my wife suggested I do some research of my own about our rights. She's always been the smart one in our relationship, and she had a feeling Ian might try something drastic. So I spent a weekend diving into local ordinances, property laws, and homeowner rights. Most of it was pretty standard stuff, but there was one ordinance that caught my attention. Apparently, our city takes tree removal very seriously, especially for mature trees. There were all sorts of permits required, environmental impact assessments, and hefty fines for unauthorized removal. The ordinance was super detailed. Any tree over 6 inches in diameter at chest height required a permit to remove. Trees over certain ages or species had additional protections. And here's the kicker. If someone removed protected trees without permits, they could face fines of up to $5,000 per tree, plus the cost of replacing them with equivalent mature trees, which could run tens of thousands per tree. I bookmarked the ordinance page and printed out a copy, figuring it might be useful information to have. I also took some detailed photos of all my trees and made notes about their approximate age and size. My wife thought I was being paranoid, but something about Ian's behavior was setting off alarm bells. Sure enough, about 2 weeks later, I got my answer about whether my paranoia was justified. I was at work on a Tuesday when my wife called me, and I could hear she was upset before she even started talking. "You need to come home right now," she said. "That psycho next door cut down your trees." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, cut down my trees?" "I mean he hired a tree service and they cut down every single oak tree along the property line. They're gone, all of them." I told my boss I had a family emergency and raced home. When I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Where there had been 8 beautiful mature oak trees that morning, there was now just a row of stumps and piles of wood chips. The entire character of my backyard had changed. Suddenly, Ian's deck had a perfect, unobstructed view of the mountains. My wife was standing in the backyard looking shell-shocked. I was running errands this morning, and when I came back, there was a tree service here with chainsaws. I ran out to stop them, but they said they had permission from the property owner. I told them those were our trees, but they showed me some paperwork that had Ian's name on it, claiming the trees were on his property. I was livid. Not just angry, absolutely seeing red. But my wife, bless her, had already started taking pictures and documenting everything. She'd gotten the name of the tree service, taken photos of the stumps, and even managed to get one of the workers to admit that Ian had hired them and claimed all the trees were on his property. That's when I remembered the ordinance I'd researched. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I was excited. I went inside and pulled up the city's website. I found the Code Enforcement Department's phone number and gave them a call. "Hi, I'd like to report unauthorized tree removal in violation of the city ordinance." The woman on the phone was very professional. She took down my information and said they'd send someone out to investigate within 24 hours. She also mentioned that if the trees were removed without proper permits, there could be significant fines and remediation requirements. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything. I measured the stumps, took photos from every angle, and researched the specific ages and species of oak trees that had been removed. Most of them were red oaks between 50, 80 years old, with trunk diameters ranging from 18 to 30 inches. The next morning, a city inspector showed up. He was this older guy who'd apparently been doing code enforcement for decades, and he took one look at the stumps and just shook his head. "This is bad," he said. "These were definitely mature protected trees. Do you know if anyone pulled permits for this removal?" "I'm pretty sure they didn't," I said. "My neighbor hired the tree service, claiming the trees were on his property." The inspector pulled out a measuring tape and started documenting each stump. "We'll need to do a proper survey to determine the exact property lines, but just from visual inspection, it looks like most of these trees were on your property. Even if some were on the property line, you both would have needed to agree to the removal and pull permits." He explained that he'd be opening a formal investigation and that EN would be notified of the violations. Depending on the final determination, EN could be facing some serious fines. I asked about the permit process just to understand what should have happened. For trees this size and age, he would have needed to submit an application with detailed justification, probably hire an arborist to assess the tree's health, possibly do an environmental impact study, and pay substantial permit fees. The city council would have had to approve it in a public hearing, and honestly, for healthy mature trees like these, just for a view improvement, they probably would have denied the permits entirely. That afternoon, EN got served with a violation notice. I happened to be checking my mail when the inspector knocked on his door, and I could hear EN's voice getting louder and more agitated as the conversation went on. About an hour later, EN came storming over to my house. His face was purple with rage. "You called the city on me!" he shouted. "I reported unauthorized tree removal," I said calmly, "which is exactly what happened. Those trees were on my property. If that were true, you still would have needed permits to remove them. This is ridiculous. They were just trees." Actually, they were protected mature trees that required city approval to remove. You should have looked into that before you had them cut down. He started ranting about property rights and how I was being vindictive, but I just went back inside. I'd learned from dealing with him before that engaging with his tantrums was pointless. Over the next few weeks, the city's investigation proceeded. They brought in a surveyor to determine the exact property lines, and it turned out that 7 of the 8 trees had been entirely on my property, with 1 tree straddling the property line. Even for that 1 tree, EN would have needed my permission and city permits to remove it. The city also brought in an arborist to assess the age and health of the trees based on the stumps and remaining root systems. His report concluded that the trees were between 55 and 75 years old, all in excellent health, and provided significant environmental benefits, including stormwater management, air quality improvement, and wildlife habitat. Then came the fun part, the city's penalty assessment. I got a call from the code enforcement officer asking if I wanted to provide input on the remediation requirements. Apparently, when someone illegally removes protected trees, the city can require them to replace the trees with equivalent mature specimens, in addition to paying fines. What would equivalent replacement look like, I asked. Well, for trees this age and size, we're talking about transplanting mature trees of similar species and trunk diameter. That typically runs $15,000 to $20,000 per tree, plus installation costs. I did some quick math in my head. 8 trees times $20,000. That was potentially over $150,000 just for tree replacement. Of course, the officer continued, the property owner can appeal the requirements or propose alternative remediation, but the fines alone are substantial. What kind of fines are we talking about? $5,000 per tree for unauthorized removal of protected trees, so $40,000 in fines plus replacement costs. I tried to keep my voice neutral, but inside I was doing a victory dance. Ian's quest for a better view was about to cost him more than most people's annual salary. A few days later, Ian received his official penalty assessment. $40,000 in fines plus a requirement to replace the trees with equivalent mature specimens at an estimated cost of $130,000. The total bill, $170,000. I know this because Ian came over that evening, and for the first time since I'd met him, he was completely deflated. Gone was the entitled attitude and aggressive posturing. He looked like a man who'd just been hit by a truck. Look, he said quietly, I think we need to talk. About what? The city wants me to pay $170,000. That sounds about right for illegally removing 8 protected mature trees. I didn't know about the permits. The tree service said they could handle everything. Did you tell them the trees were on your property? He had the decency to look ashamed. I thought some of them were. But you knew at least some of them weren't. I thought if I just did it, you couldn't stop me, and eventually you'd get over it. I stared at him. You destroyed 8 60-year-old trees that weren't yours because you thought I'd just get over it? Look, I know I messed up. But $170,000? That's more than my car cost. That's going to ruin me financially. You should have thought about that before you cut down my trees. Isn't there anything we can work out? Some kind of compromise? I pretended to think about it. Well, you could appeal the city's requirements. Would that work? You'd have to convince them that healthy, mature trees on someone else's property needed to be removed for safety reasons. Given that you told the tree service they were your trees and you just wanted a better view, I don't think that's going to fly. What about the replacement requirement? Do I really have to replant mature trees? That's up to the city, but the ordinance is pretty clear. Unauthorized removal of protected trees requires replacement with equivalent specimens. He stood there looking defeated for a few minutes. This is going to bankrupt me. Maybe you should have offered to split the cost of a consultation with an arborist before cutting down the trees. Would have been a lot cheaper than $170,000. That was apparently the wrong thing to say because his defeated expression started shifting back toward anger. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I'm enjoying the fact that there are consequences for your actions, yes. I'm going to fight this. There's no way the city can make this stick. Good luck with that. He stormed off, and I went inside to tell my wife about the conversation. She just shook her head and said, some people never learn. Ian did try to fight it. He hired a lawyer and appealed the penalty assessment. His argument was basically that the fines were excessive and that requiring mature tree replacement was unreasonable. The city council hearing was open to the public, so my wife and I attended. Ian's lawyer argued that his client had made an honest mistake about property lines and that the punishment didn't fit the crime. Then the city's attorney presented their case. They had photos of the trees before removal, the surveyor's report showing the trees were on my property, documentation that no permits had been requested, and the arborist's assessment of the tree's age and environmental value. But the most damaging evidence was a statement from one of the tree service workers. Apparently, when the city investigated, they interviewed the crew that did the removal. One of the guys admitted that EN had specifically told them he knew some of the trees might be on his neighbor's property, but that I was being unreasonable, and he was sure it would work itself out. The council deliberated for about 10 minutes before upholding the full penalty assessment. Ian's lawyer then tried to negotiate a payment plan, but the city was pretty firm. The fines had to be paid within 90 days, and the tree replacement had to be completed within 6 months. That's when things got really interesting. A few weeks after the council hearing, I noticed a for sale sign go up in Ian's yard. Then I saw him packing a moving truck. Apparently, rather than pay the penalties, he was just going to sell the house and move. But here's the thing about municipal fines. They attach to the property. The city put a lien on Ian's house for the full penalty amount, which meant he couldn't sell without paying it off. I found this out when a real estate agent came by asking if I knew anything about tree removal on the neighboring property. Apparently, potential buyers were getting scared off when they learned about the $170,000 lien. The house sat on the market for months. EN had to keep making mortgage payments while dealing with the fact that no one wanted to buy a house with a massive environmental remediation lien attached to it. Finally, about 8 months after he'd cut down my trees, EN came over one last time. "I'll pay for the tree replacement," he said, "but I want to work out some kind of arrangement on the fines." "That's between you and the city," I said, "but I am interested in getting my trees back. What if I pay for mature tree replacement and you talk to the city about reducing the fines?" I thought about it. The truth was, I mostly just wanted my trees back. The fines were nice karma, but they didn't restore my privacy or the character of my backyard. "I'll tell you what," I said. "You pay for proper mature tree replacement, trees that are comparable to what you cut down, professionally installed with a guarantee that they'll survive. And you pay the full $40,000 in fines. In exchange, I'll write a letter to the city saying that I consider the matter resolved from my perspective." $40,000 is still a lot of money. It's a lot less than $170,000, and it's a lot less than what you would have paid if you just offered to split the cost of a consultation before cutting down my trees. He agreed. It took him almost a year to pay everything off, but eventually I got 8 beautiful mature oak trees professionally installed along the property line. They weren't quite as big as the originals, but they were substantial trees that immediately restored most of the privacy and character that had been lost. EN ended up paying about $60,000 total, $40,000 for the fines and $20,000 for the tree replacement. He also had to take out a second mortgage on his house to cover the costs. The best part? The new trees actually block his view even more than the original ones did, because the city required them to be planted slightly closer together to ensure adequate coverage. And EN learned a valuable lesson about property rights, municipal ordinances, and the importance of getting proper permits before making major changes that affect your neighbors. As for me, I learned the value of doing my homework when dealing with difficult neighbors. That weekend of research into city ordinances turned what could have been a heartbreaking loss into a very satisfying example of malicious compliance with municipal tree protection laws. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting someone face the natural consequences of their own entitled behavior. The next one is a petty revenge story. I run a physical therapy clinic and my fiancé is a lawyer. A few months ago at our engagement party, I mentioned to a few of her colleagues that I'm happy to give them a discount if they need to see me. 4 of them have become my regulars. One day, one of her partners booked in. To put it lightly, none of the colleagues or my fiancé like him. After spending an hour with him, I understand why. He's very arrogant and condescending, but strangely desperate for approval. I remained pleasant with him, though. After paying, he did mention, but I just said, well, it's for employees with a smirk. He's been in a few times. 3 weeks ago, he came in, and conversation turned to how my day was going. One of the therapists was sick, so I was busier than usual seeing their clients. He said that must be annoying and asked if they needed a medical certificate. I just said no, and I think that's a stupid policy, as I'd rather someone stay home and not infect the clinic. He countered, saying he wanted to be more strict with that at his office to prevent people slacking off. I ended up getting a rotten cold and eventually gave it to my fiancée. It hit her hard and she ended up working from home Friday. She deteriorated over the weekend and took Monday off. Her boss emailed her this morning saying she'd need a medical certificate, first time that's been enforced. Coincidentally, he had a 2 o'clock appointment with me today, so I booked my fiancée in with her doctor at 2 and let him know that I have to cancel his appointment because I have to drive her to the doctor. To be fair, she's got vertigo and is pretty lightheaded. I'd get back to him if I had any availability, but I'm fully booked for the next 3 weeks. He's messaged both of us saying that the medical isn't necessary. My fiancée said she can't cancel due to late cancellation policy and that it's rude, and I just said it's best she go. The next one is a malicious compliance story. One of the degree modules I teach involves students working on a group programming project. Nothing too elaborate, but the aim of the module is to develop skills they will need if they go on to work in the IT field. After all, if you're doing a computer science degree, you must be thinking of going down that route. This one student is an absolute entitled nightmare. He uses GenAI for a lot of his work, and it really does show. He always pushed back on the written remarks on his work, but every time I sit him down and ask him to explain the code he produces, he struggles and often has no idea how the code he submitted works. In this project, he came up and told me he cannot work with others in the group and must work alone. I explained that there are specific group activities and efforts I would be marking and that I needed to see his input within the group. There was no way I could excuse him from the group activities in the module, however I could see he was not going to budge and therefore complied with his demand to work on the project alone. All the students in my class had been assigned to their groups and I did check in with all of them on a weekly basis. This one guy was steadfastly refusing to work with the rest of his group, and as I had complied with his request, he was working on his own project alone. In my interim feedback at the end of each stage, I repeated that he really should work with the group, or he risked a failing mark for the module. I made sure this feedback was sent to him both in hard copy and also via email with read receipts, which I kept. Cue the end of the module and the submission for marking. Sure enough, the one student submitted a project based just on his own work and had not engaged with the group he was asked to work with. There were several issues with his project. First and most important was it didn't meet the brief. The code simply didn't do what we asked for. He lost marks for that aspect of the project. As he had not worked with others in the group, he was not awarded any of the group marks allocated for the work. Because his code was so far away from the specification, I called him in for a viva voce to explain the code, and he demonstrated a complete lack of understanding of the code he submitted. More marks dropped. His eventual mark for this assignment was a hard fail. He must now resit the entire module. There is, of course, one real downside of this whole thing that affects me. I've got him in my group again for the resit of the module.
I am the executive assistant to the CEO of a pretty big fashion brand, which basically means I'm my boss's idiot, and I do whatever she asks. My job has many aspects and is always open to more. It gets tiring sometimes, but there are perks to my job. I get free clothes a lot, mainly for when I go to big events with my boss. It wouldn't look very good if I was wearing another designer. But my boss also gives me any defects. Clothing that came out wrong or is imperfect or not up to my boss's standards. Now this for some reason makes people think I'm stuck up. I swear I'm not. I really appreciate that my boss does this, as there was a time when I had very little and couldn't afford to buy food no matter whether my clothing was cheap or expensive. Anyways, one day my boss mentioned that one of the wedding dresses she had was a defect. The train was shorter than it was supposed to be. She asked if I knew anyone who could use one, which I didn't. My best friend of 5 years had gotten engaged a few months before. My boss gave it to me, and I gave it to my friend. This friend has been there for me since I was 20. She took me in and helped me find my path out of a very dark situation. I love her more than anything in the world. Here's where things get messy. My friend made a post thanking me and my boss, and my family saw it, and it started a stream of calls and messages from my family. I do not have a good relationship with my family. My parents kicked me out when I was 16 after I came out to them. My sister wasn't much better than my parents. We actually never got along even before I was kicked out. She's a very entitled person who was very selfish. I struggled for a long time after that. I lived with my aunt until I was 18, which wasn't easy as we had little money. I ended up going to design school, getting an internship, and then a job at my current company. It wasn't until my family found out that I was making good money and working for a multi-million-dollar company did they suddenly want to be back in my life, which I allowed to avoid drama. Basically, my mom and sister called demanding to know why I gave the dress to my friend and not my sister. Apparently she was getting married. I didn't even know she was engaged. They berated me, yelling how family should come first. These are the same people who kicked me out at 16. They even suggested I try to take it back from my friend as family should come first. When I told them point blank that was never going to happen, they started bashing me to extended family, who also started messaging me, insulting me. My sister even tried to call my boss to complain, which is just nuts, right? Update 1. Well, last night my entitled family struck again. Last night I got a call from my mother. At this point, I haven't spoken to my family since the previous incident. This is the conversation we had. Me. Hello. Mom. Hello, Dax. Me. Mom, what is it now? A little rude, I know, but it's gotten to the point I can't even pretend to be nice with them. Mom. Your sister is still upset about the dress. Me. Well, she needs to get over it. I gave the dress to Megan. It belongs to Megan, plain and simple. Mom. I know. Me. Really? Mom. She accepted she's not getting the dress. Me. Okay, good. Mom. Me and your sister came up with a way to make it up to her. Me. What? Mom. Since you didn't give her the other dress, we thought you could get her another one. Me. I can't do that. Mom. Why not? You got one for that friend of yours. Me. I didn't get one for her. My boss gave me a defect dress and told me I could give it to someone I know who needed it. Mom. Your sister doesn't want a defect, she needs a perfect dress. Me. Are you kidding me? Mom. No, she says she wants the one from your post on your Instagram the other day. Me. That dress cost $12,000. Mom. That's perfect. Me. Seriously? You expect me to give you guys a $12,000 dress? Are you high? Mom. You do not speak to your mother that way. Me. You're ridiculous. Mom. She is your sister. Do you have no respect for family? Me. Respect? Seriously? You kicked me out when I was 16. Mom. Dax, that was a long time ago, and we're talking about your sister, not me. Me. Yeah, my sister. The one who calls me her faggot brother when I'm not around. I am not getting her a dress from work, and that's final. Mom. Fine, but the least you can do is help buy her one. Me. Are you kidding me? At this point, I hang up. She calls back a few times, but I just ignore them. I really consider cutting them off again. This is getting ridiculous. Final update. I posted a few more stories as well, but had to delete them to protect myself because things got serious fast, and I had to take minor legal action against my parents and major legal action against my sister. The legal action took a lot out of me, so I'm gonna stop posting about it, even though I said I would. Even when it was over, I wasn't really in the mood to write about it. I deleted my original account. I tried to come back before, but still wasn't ready. But I was recently scrolling through Facebook and I saw my story in a popular TikToker's video, and it made me want to share an update. So here it is. So, 2 months after getting a no-contact order on my sister, the pandemic broke out. Me and my husband, then boyfriend, lived in a very small one-bedroom apartment. So, before it got bad, we moved out to his parents' farm as they had a huge farmhouse with plenty of room. I cannot tell you how happy I was we did this, as a few weeks after we had moved out. My sister shows up at my apartment. Again, we were not home, but our doorbell cam caught everything. Due to it being legal evidence, I'm not allowed to share the video. She showed up and started banging on the door. At first, she was just screaming my name and yelling for us to open. But then she started yelling insults, her favorite being the word faggot. It was pretty much faggot this, faggot that. And then she started threatening us. Threatening our lives. And at first we figured she was just saying stuff to scare us, but the threatening got disturbing and detailed. We took the video to the police. But there wasn't much they could do as they had no idea who she was. My sister does not live in America. We were both born in another country. I moved here on a student visa when I was 18, I got a work visa after that, and became an American citizen legally a year ago when I married my husband. My sister still lives in our home country. So me and my fiancé pretty much had to sit in fear. A few days later, our apartment was broken into and trashed. Again, the doorbell cam showed it was my sister. Good news is, she was caught this time, fleeing the scene. Now, my sister got in a lot of trouble, not just for what she did to us, but because she's traveling to another country during a pandemic. Both the US and our home country had travel bans on at the time. How my sister found a way around it, I have no idea. My sister spent a month here in the state as they decided what to do with her. But they ultimately decided to send her home to be dealt with there. Which sadly means I have no clue what her charges are. I haven't gotten any messages from my parents or my sister. Likely because they don't want to personally mix the pot. My sister is facing some serious charges back home, but I've gotten a lot of hate from other family members, telling me it's my fault for what happened to my sister. So yeah, there you go. Not really too exciting, but I felt the need to update. Reminder, I am not OP. The next story is titled, Our New Neighbor Thinks She Owns the Building. Anyway, I, 31F, live in a block of 6 units, apartments for non-Australians. A month ago, the unit above mine went up for sale and sold fairly quickly, and the new owner moved in less than a week ago. This morning, I got up and went to take the rubbish out and found a note stuck to my door. I honestly thought it was a I'm new to the building kind of note, you know? Oh, I could not have been more wrong. Dear tenant, I recently bought your building and wish to introduce myself. My name's blah blah, not going to put her actual name, and I think you will find me a fair landlord. However, I do have rules. Everyone is to be in their units by 9 p.m. If you're going to be out past this, I suggest you find accommodation elsewhere. No pets allowed. If you have any, they must be relocated before I do an inspection, or I will call the ranger to remove them. This is the only warning. I will conduct an inspection once a month, and you will be present to answer any questions or face eviction. Failure to pay rent on time will result in your eviction. If we all follow these rules, I'm sure we'll get along. Sincerely, blah blah. What the duck did I just read? Fun fact about my building, we all own our own units. Nobody actually owns the whole building. I won't lie, I got to the number 2 and had a slight panic attack because I have cats and there's no way I was giving them away before I remembered we bought our unit just before Christmas. We rented it from a friend prior, and when she told me she was thinking about selling it, we bought it. Didn't even have to move. So in some ways it still feels like renting, but we actually own our unit. Now, I'm not great at confronting someone, I tend to shake a lot, but at that moment I was quite angry, so I went upstairs and knocked on her door. You know that gut feeling you have? It was spot on. That door opened, and there stood a Karen. Her hair blonder than my own, her nails long and bright colored. She didn't look happy to see me there. I introduced myself and explained that I lived downstairs and that I wanted to talk to her about her note. She started to talk over top of me, explaining that her letter was basic rules and even a child could understand it, and if I didn't like her rules, I could hand in a letter to vacate. Wow. I would ask if people are really this up themselves, but I work in retail and could answer my own question. I told her that I actually owned my unit, she hadn't bought it or the rest of the building, but only her own unit, and that she couldn't enforce anything in her note. She didn't like that at all. She started yelling at me, saying that yes, she had indeed bought the whole building and that failure to comply with her rules would mean I would be evicted. I was just starting to think maybe I was wrong when another neighbor opened his door. He came out and asked what the issues were about and could she stop screaming as he worked nights and was trying to sleep. I told him I was trying to explain that she hadn't bought the building and she started yelling again. My neighbor told her to stop and then said the best thing I had heard that day. "Are you stupid?" Her jaw dropped as he explained to her how wrong she was and that he was in fact part of the Strata Committee, kind of like an HOA that oversees the building, and that she had no right to make rules for everyone. She gave us dirty looks before slamming the door. I thanked him, and he said in the entire time he lived there he hadn't seen someone so entitled. The next story is titled, Call My Place of Employment for a Google Review? Enjoy an even more scathing one revealing your harassment. Today, I was going about my shift at the general store I work at, and at about noon or so, shortly after I had finished cleaning the windows, a couple of guys for a local window cleaning place came and started streaking the windows before they had even dried, and then not even 5 minutes later they came in and asked me to get a manager to try and quote us for window cleaning. Understandably frustrated, I told them that we do our own cleaning and that it would not be necessary and sent them on their way. After hanging around outside for another 10 or so minutes, they finally left after being shooed off. I saw the name of the company they work for on their shirt, so I decided to leave a Google review explaining what had happened. Not even 20 minutes later, the owner of the company called my place of employment asking for me. My coworker brought me the phone, and immediately he began yelling at me and threatening to send the police down to force me to remove my review. Cue my even more petty revenge. I promptly updated my review, explaining everything that happened. The next story is titled, Cut in Front of Me in the Dinner Queue. I hope you like ants. A few years ago, while traveling in India, I decided to try a 10-day silent meditation retreat. The retreat was out in the middle of nowhere and home to a large colony of the biggest and fiercest ants I have ever seen. As this was a Buddhist retreat, no measures were taken to get rid of them, and they were everywhere. When you turned on a tap, ants came first, then the water. That's not hyperbole. A couple of days in, my hard-earned tranquility was shattered by another meditator who felt it his right to cut in front of me while waiting for our evening meal. The bastard even had the audacity to give me a little smirk as he did it, knowing I couldn't call him out on it. I could only glare impotently at the back of his queue-jumping head. I was livid, to say the least. In the following meditation sessions, I couldn't concentrate on the practice. I could think of nothing but revenge. Luckily, I had a lot of time to think, and slowly a plan emerged. The following day, whilst making myself a cup of chai, I surreptitiously pocketed a large handful of sugar, which I later dispensed into a half-full water bottle, creating a lovely syrup. At the next meditation session, I made sure I was last in line to enter the building. Before you enter the building, you remove your flip-flops and leave them outside. I made sure to mark my enemy's footwear as he removed them, and when I was alone outside, I joyfully doused them in syrup, being careful to avoid any innocent victim's shoes. After a few hours of peaceful meditation, we all began leaving the building. Doubts had started entering my mind. What if it didn't work? What if he only has sticky flip-flops? Not the worst outcome, but still. However, I was in luck. My plan had worked. His flip-flops were now a writhing mass of angry, sugar-fueled ants. His face was priceless. Shock, horror, complete confusion. He broke his vow of silence instantly, but it was in Hindi, so I'll never know what he said. The tone was disbelief, though. He tried, vainly, to gingerly pick one up, but was fended off by the gallant soldier ants with their massive jaws. He eventually found a stick with which to hook them, but that failed as well as the ants started to climb down the stick, frightening him into dropping it. He left barefoot and perplexed. Victory was mine, and I could return to my meditation satiated. The last story is titled, Anytime I Think About It, I Can't Help But Giggle. I used to work for a guy that was a massive asshole. He purchased the business on a whim and swiftly ran it into the ground. I left the place, but he did his best to drag my name through the mud well after I was gone. In response, I had business cards printed that say, "You park like a jackass. Give me a call for a free parking lesson," with his phone number listed underneath. Anytime I see someone parked terribly, I will pop a business card under the wiper. It brings me such joy to know that on any day of the week, this guy is going to be ultra confused by some random person calling him and telling him to go and fuck himself for commenting on their parking.
The next one is an entitled People Story. Background: my cousin Julia, 23F, recently opened up her own salon. Since she was young, she taught herself how to thread wax eyebrows and developed a passion for makeup and hairstyling. Everyone in our extended family would come to her for their monthly beauty needs and special events. In 2023, while working a full-time office job, she renovated her basement into a cozy salon space. She now takes clients in her at-home salon during her free time, and her reviews are consistently excellent. Her sister Amy helps with social media marketing and community outreach, while I manage the financial aspects like budgeting and pricing. We're all incredibly supportive and proud of her success. The salon has become our shared passion project. During the ongoing health crisis of 2024 to 2025, her business faced significant challenges. We implemented strict safety protocols and stayed current with local health regulations. These measures included one client at a time policy, temperature screening, mandatory masks and face shields, glove requirements, and thorough sanitization between clients. Whenever our city entered lockdown phases, we promptly closed the salon as it wasn't classified as an essential service. Incident: our city entered another lockdown from mid-December 2024 through January 2025. The salon had been closed since the restrictions began, and we'd updated all our social media platforms to inform clients about the temporary closure. Enter Mrs. Turner, our Karen. She spotted a promotional post from September about a special package discount and immediately commented, "I can't believe you're operating during lockdown when legitimate businesses like mine have to stay closed." The post was clearly dated from September when salons were permitted to operate under safety guidelines. She completely ignored our recent posts announcing our closure. Julia hadn't noticed her comment initially. The next day, 2 officers appeared at Julia's door while she was at her doctor's appointment. They spoke with my Aunt Maria, who has limited English proficiency. She explained that Julia wasn't home and offered to call her. The officers seemed skeptical and insisted on entering the house. Maria called Julia, who asked if they had a warrant. When they confirmed they didn't, Julia told her mother, "Mom, don't let them in. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The officers left but returned 30 minutes later, again demanding to see Julia. When Julia finally reached them by phone, they explained someone had reported her business for operating during lockdown. Julia quickly connected the dots to Mrs. Turner's comment and clarified the situation. The officer apologized, and we thought that was the end of it. Mrs. Turner revealed herself through a series of messages. Mrs. Turner: "Hi, can I schedule an appointment?" Julia: "Hello, we're currently closed due to lockdown restrictions. We'd be happy to book you once restrictions lift." Mrs. Turner: "Oh, that's weird. My friend was there yesterday." Julia: "That's impossible. We're strictly closed during lockdown." Mrs. Turner: "Whatever. I know the police visited. Have fun with that." Julia: "I don't appreciate you spreading false information and wasting police resources." Mrs. Turner: "I own a spa that's following the rules, unlike you. My mother reported you. Why don't you go back where you came from instead of causing problems here?" Revenge. After Julia blocked Mrs. Turner, I couldn't let go of the racist comment and how she'd frightened my aunt. The mention of her owning a spa caught my attention, so I started investigating. I discovered Mrs. Turner operated her spa, Glowing Grace Beauty, from her home. Looking through her business page, I noticed recent client reviews during lockdown periods. While these could have been delayed reviews from previous appointments, I needed to dig deeper. I found her Instagram page and decided to use her own tactics. Creating a new account under the name Jenny Smith, I followed her and sent a message. Me: "Your work looks amazing. Could you tell me about your pricing?" Mrs. Turner: "Thanks, hun. What services are you interested in?" Me: "The BB Glow facial looks incredible." Mrs. Turner: "That's my specialty. Usually $150, but I'm running a special. Buy one, get one free." Me: "That's such a great deal. When can you fit me in?" Mrs. Turner: "What area are you in? During lockdown, I'm doing house calls only." Bingo. Not only was she operating, but she was traveling to clients' homes, also against regulations. I fabricated a story about my home being unsuitable and asked about meeting at an alternate location. She readily provided her address, 742 Maple Street. I joined several community groups she participated in and found a recent post advertising January specials. Armed with evidence, I submitted a detailed report to the health authorities, including screenshots, her address, and full name. A week later, I checked the incident report number. To my surprise, this wasn't her first violation. She'd previously received a $750 fine for serving clients during the first lockdown. This time, authorities imposed a $10,000 fine and suspended her business license. Checking her Instagram one last time, I found a furious post. "To whoever reported me, you've destroyed my business. I will find out who you are, and you'll regret this. This is my livelihood." I promptly deleted my fake account and left all the community groups. Mrs. Turner learned the hard way that racism and false accusations have consequences. The salon reopened once restrictions lifted, and Julia's business is thriving more than ever. Sometimes karma needs a little help, and playing detective for a day was definitely worth it. The next one is an entitled People Story. Looking back, I still can't believe everything that happened. One minute I was living a normal life in my quiet suburban home, and the next I was standing in the middle of rubble, watching firefighters douse the remains of what used to be my living room after a small plane crashed into it. I'll never forget that day. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I was thankfully at work when my phone started blowing up with calls and texts. My neighbor across the street was the first to reach me. "There's been an accident. A plane, it crashed into your house. You need to come home now." I thought it was some kind of sick joke until she sent me the photos. A small single-engine Cessna had lost power and crashed directly into the front of my house. The pilot had survived with injuries, but my home was destroyed. The entire front section collapsed, with fire damage throughout most of the rest. When I arrived, the street was blocked off with emergency vehicles, news crews, and what felt like half the neighborhood standing behind yellow police tape. The fire had been put out, but smoke still hung in the air. I just stood there in shock, watching strangers in uniforms walk through the ruins of my life. The insurance company put me up in a hotel while they processed my claim. The investigation determined the pilot had experienced catastrophic engine failure and had tried to make an emergency landing on the road but clipped a tree and spun into my house. It was nobody's fault, just a freak accident. After a month of paperwork and inspections, I finally got approval to rebuild. The insurance payout would cover most of it, and I was eager to get started. I hired a contractor who specialized in disaster rebuilds, and we got to work designing a new layout. I decided to make a few improvements while I was at it. After all, if I had to rebuild, I might as well end up with something better than before. That's when the HOA decided to make themselves known. I should mention that our HOA was relatively hands-off. We had the usual rules about lawn maintenance and exterior colors, but they rarely enforced anything unless someone complained. I'd lived there for 6 years and had maybe 2 interactions with them total, so I was surprised when I received a certified letter from them 3 days after construction began. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have begun construction on your property without submitting plans to the Architectural Review Committee, as required by Covenant 7.3 of the HOA bylaws. All construction must cease immediately until proper approval is obtained. I called the HOA president, Richard, immediately. Richard, my house was hit by a plane. I'm rebuilding it. What's the problem? I understand your situation, but rules are rules, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. You need to submit your plans to the committee, pay the $250 review fee, and wait for approval before continuing. My house is literally a pile of rubble. I'm living in a hotel. The insurance company approved the rebuild. This is an emergency situation. Emergency or not, the bylaws don't have exceptions. If we let you skip the process, everyone will want exceptions. I took a deep breath. Richard, who exactly is going to claim a plane crashed into their house as precedent? That's not the point. Submit your plans by Friday and we'll try to expedite the review process. I hung up, furious but not wanting to make enemies. I submitted the plans that afternoon, paid the ridiculous fee, and waited. 2 weeks later, I still hadn't heard back. My contractor was getting antsy about the delay and I was paying for each day the crew wasn't working. I called Richard again. The committee has concerns about your proposed changes, he told me. The additional dormer window on the second floor isn't in keeping with the neighborhood aesthetic, and we don't approve of the stone facade you've chosen. Are you kidding me? My entire house was destroyed and you're worried about a window? We have standards to maintain. Property values affect everyone. I was seething, but tried to stay calm. Fine. I'll remove the dormer and change the stone. Can I get approval now so I can continue? Submit the revised plans and we'll review them at our next meeting. When is that? 3 weeks from now. That was the breaking point. I thanked him politely, hung up, and called my contractor to resume construction immediately. I wasn't going to wait another month while paying for a hotel and an idle construction crew just because the HOA was on a power trip. Construction resumed the next day. By the end of the week, the framing was up, and I was feeling optimistic for the first time since the crash. Then I got another letter, this time threatening legal action for violating the cease construction order. I ignored it. A week later, I was served with actual lawsuit papers. The HOA was suing me for violating the covenants and seeking an injunction to stop construction, plus fines of $100 per day since they'd sent the first letter. I had to hire a lawyer, which was another expense I didn't need, but when I explained the situation to her, she actually smiled. They picked the wrong house to mess with, she said. I specialize in HOA disputes, and this is one of the most ridiculous cases I've seen. My lawyer Diane explained that while HOA have broad powers, there are limits, especially in cases of emergency repairs and insurance-approved rebuilds. Plus, there was the matter of the HOA's own bylaws, which she asked me to provide. After reviewing them, she found something interesting. There was indeed a section requiring approval for new construction and major renovations, but there was also a clause about disaster recovery that the HOA had conveniently ignored. In cases of damage due to fire, flood, storm, or other disasters, homeowners may proceed with necessary repairs to restore the property to its pre-disaster condition without prior approval, provided such repairs do not substantially alter the exterior appearance of the structure. The HOA was banking on the fact that most homeowners don't read the entire bylaws and just comply when threatened. But I had a lawyer who did read them, and she was ready to fight. We filed a countersuit claiming harassment and bad faith enforcement of the covenants. We also requested all records of the HOA's architectural reviews for the past 5 years, suspecting selective enforcement. The case moved slowly, as these things do. Meanwhile, I continued with construction, ignoring the daily violation notices piling up in my mailbox. 6 months after the plane crash, my new house was nearly complete, dormer window, stone facade, and all. The day before our court date, Richard called me. "We should discuss settling this matter," he said, his tone notably less confident. "I'm listening," I replied. "If you'll agree to remove the dormer window and pay a reduced fine of $1,000, we'll drop the lawsuit." I laughed. "Richard, I'm not paying you a penny, and I'm not changing anything about my house. Did your lawyer explain what's going to happen in court tomorrow?" He was silent for a moment. "We're trying to be reasonable here." "So am I. Drop the lawsuit completely, reimburse my legal fees, and I won't pursue my countersuit for harassment. That's my only offer. He hung up on me. The next day in court was more satisfying than I could have imagined. The judge, an older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, didn't bother hiding her incredulity as the HOA's lawyer tried to explain why enforcing architectural guidelines was more important than allowing a homeowner to rebuild after a plane crash. "Let me get this straight," the judge interrupted. "A plane, an actual aircraft, crashed into this man's house, destroying it completely, and your concern was the style of window in the reconstruction?" The HOA lawyer stammered something about property values and community standards. "And you're aware," the judge continued, "that your own bylaws specifically exempt disaster recovery from the approval process?" That's when it became clear the HOA's lawyer hadn't read the bylaws carefully either. His face turned red as he flipped through his papers. The judge was not amused. "I've seen some frivolous HOA actions in my time on the bench, but this may take the prize." She dismissed their case and ordered them to pay my legal fees, but it didn't end there. When my lawyer presented evidence that the HOA had selectively enforced the architectural guidelines, approving similar windows and facades for board members' homes without the formal review process, the judge decided to hear our countersuit immediately. Richard squirmed in his seat as my lawyer methodically presented examples of the HOA's inconsistent enforcement and harassment. By the end, the judge ruled in our favor, finding that the HOA had acted in bad faith. The final judgment, the HOA had to pay my legal fees, around $15,000, acknowledge in writing that my house complied with all covenants, and issue a formal apology to be included in the next neighborhood newsletter. Additionally, the judge ordered the HOA board to attend a course on proper HOA governance and fair enforcement of covenants. As we left the courthouse, Richard approached me with a tense smile. "No hard feelings, I hope," he said, extending his hand. I didn't shake it. "The next board election is in 2 months. I'll be running for president. I suggest you don't." He didn't run, and neither did most of the existing board. I didn't end up becoming president. I nominated my neighbor who had helped me throughout the ordeal, but I did join the Architectural Review Committee. My first motion was to simplify the approval process and create clear, fair guidelines that everyone could understand. My house was finally completed a year after the crash. The dormer window lets in beautiful morning light and the stone facade looks fantastic. Every time I pull into my driveway, I feel a sense of pride, not just for the house itself, but for standing up to bullies who thought they could take advantage of someone in a desperate situation. And the best part? When my next-door neighbor decided to add a similar dormer window to her house, the Architectural Review Committee approved it in less than a week. No drama, no fuss, just reasonable people making reasonable decisions. Sometimes it takes a disaster to bring about positive change. In my case, it took a plane crash, a power-hungry HOA, and a courtroom showdown. But in the end, our whole neighborhood is better for it. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A little bit of background. Due to horrible teachers and my easily intimidated personality, I developed the fear of making mistakes since I was getting yelled at constantly for making some. Now, my body tried to avoid school and the stress that comes with it by developing the habit of vomiting to prove my mother I was sick so I could stay home. Problem was, my body tries it a lot when I get stressed out. Now I can suppress that habit to a certain degree if I focus on my breathing and close my eyes. But sooner or later I have to leave the stress-causing situation or I vomit. Now, a little bit of German background since I don't know if this concept exists in other countries. We call it Zeitarbeit, and Google translated it to temporarily employment. But long story short, it just means that you don't apply at the company you want to work for. You apply for the Zeitarbeit company, ZC, who then find jobs for you. You go to the ZC, give any important information they need to find you a job you don't totally hate, and if they find something, they call you and you have an interview with the new company you may work for. Then, if you agree to work there, you are a temporarily employee for 6 months. After the 6 months, they either let you go if the company believes it doesn't work out, or you get hired and now have a full job. In theory, that sounds awesome. In practicality, the companies spare money if they let go of the temporarily employee and circle to new ones, so your chance of staying is barely non-existing. Not to mention, in the 6 months, they don't need a reason to let you go, other than to say it doesn't work out. Now to the story. The first 2 jobs I got through ZC. I try hard to impress them, doing overtime, work more outside my job description, always being on time and never be sick. I ignored my mental problems and drowned them at home to endure everything. However, I wouldn't be here if I got hired. This story takes place in 2018, my 4th job, a factory where I have to pack and sort stuff. However, now I was far less enthusiastic, no overtime, keeping to my job description, but I still was always on time and stayed my 40 hours week. However, the manager demanded overtime nearly daily. I wasn't going to do it, not for minimum wage, and she didn't like it, but I was doing my job, so I believe she kept me in for the full 6 months before they let me go. But then, I made an absolute fatal mistake by daring to get sick. I got a cyst very close to my private area, and I could barely walk, stand, or even sit. Laying was uncomfortable, but at least not painful. I went to the doctor, got antibiotics, and a doctor's note for 7 days. 5 for the antibiotics, and 2 to see if it helped enough. I called in my job to state I was sick for a week, but my manager demanded I gave it to her in person or she would let me go then and there. Now I was annoyed, tired, and in pain that I have to go in, since I was just in my 2nd month working there, so I accepted and my parents drove me in. I waddled like an X-legged penguin through the factory into her office. She didn't saw me walk since she was writing something. I put the doctor's notice on her desk, close to some other documents. She looked up at me and started talking. A lot! Now, you can imagine that condescending Karen tone in her voice. She started lecturing me how she dislikes I don't do overtime, and now that I'm lazy and went to the doctor to get a week of paid vacation, that I need to work on my working morale and that my chances of getting hired are very slim and I need to put in 110% if I want to have a chance. Now, my pain around my private area started worsening due to me standing, so I barely listened to her after that, but I noticed her voice got louder and louder, and she somehow talked herself into rage, nearly yelling at this point, and I felt my stomach started turning. I started my strategies to keep my stomach calm since I knew it would be maybe a few minutes of her complaining before I can leave. I tried to cut in to explain that I need to go home to rest, but she had none of it and interrupt me, telling me how disrespectful it is to interrupt some. The irony, lel. Cue my malicious compliance. I stopped calming down my stomach and let it does what it want to do, and surprise, not even after a minute, everything comes out, hitting her desk and covers some of her documents and half of my doctor's note. Her face was absolutely priceless, though I wished I could enjoyed it more, next to my pain and new taste. After her initial shock and silence, she finally sent me home to rest. I still think about it till today. After the week, I came back rather healthy, and I got pulled into her office where she and another boss/manager waited for me. After a few words back and forth, they asked me why I didn't even try turn around as I vomited since I apparently destroyed some important documents. And even though I was not obligated to it, I explained the cyst I had, that I couldn't even walk, stand, or turn around without a lot of pain, let alone going to the next restroom or trash bin, and that I shouldn't even been there in the first place since a doctor's note can be handed over after I came back. The other manager boss looked super pissy at my manager. After more unimportant back and forth, I returned back to work. I still got let go after the 6th month, but I wasn't sorry about this job. I then decided to start focusing on my mental health and my addiction problem. For the last bit of fact, the manager was gone quickly after me and the factory was destroyed end of 2024. According to some of my old colleagues, they were constantly firing and more people were quitting on their own. The next one is an entitled People Story. I've spoken of bits of this stuff in other posts, but I had to learn the hard way my sister can't be loaned money. She never liked paying it back, and I had to remind her a lot. There weren't many times in my 20s she borrowed from me. She borrowed stuff more than money then. I made the mistake of lending her my NES, and her cats destroyed it. And speaking of cats, a decade ago she had to have a cat put down, and she called me begging I drive over and help her. She and all her kids pile into my old car, and we went to the vet. The elderly cat had broken its leg badly and may have been hit by a car or even kicked from what the vet told us. We had this big emotional farewell of my sister's cat passing away. And then right in the middle of it, my sister looks at me while sobbing and said, "Da foxtrot, can you pay for it?" She sandbagged me in the middle of that in front of the kids. It took her months before she paid me back, and was embittered when she finally did. I think she was hoping I'd just let it go for the sake of the cat. Never mind, she also dumped a sickly cat on me for years and barely saw it at all. Then lost her mind calling it her baby and said I was just giving up when the vet said the cat needed to be put down. There were a couple of other small money lending situations during that time. I can't remember for what, but like always it was a chore to get paid back. And while it's not lending per se, once around that time I paid a visit to my sister and was very tired when I was at her house. So I took a nap on her couch. I had a habit of taking my wallet, phone, and anything else in my pockets and putting them in my hat on the end table before sleeping on the couch. Well, after I woke up, I found my stuff on the floor. My nephews had gone through the stuff in my hat and scattered it on the floor. They did this once when stealing my mother's purse to look for money in it. They thankfully didn't steal the cash in my wallet, but they stole all the loose change I had sitting in that hat. I was furious and demanded my sister get it all back, and she was basically like, "Oh, lighten up, it's just some loose change." But she willingly let it happen, and as many know from reading my other posts, is an absolutely terrible parent. Her attitude about it pissed me off, so I demanded all that change back and even pointed out what kind of poor example she was setting for her kids. She tried to brush me off and say they were just kids, but I pointed out how she let them steal from me and how I wouldn't let that happen to her. So what kind of example was she setting by not punishing her kids for stealing? My sister ended up looking resigned to the fact I wasn't letting it go. She called her kids into the living room and told them to give the money back. They tried to deny it with crap-eating grins until I pointed out the facts, and then they started crying because they didn't want to give it back. They had to go into their rooms and look for it. They only found about 2/3 of it to return to me, but enough of an example was made. They never stole money from me again. My sister acted like I went too far, and I told her those boys needed that discipline or they'd never stop. After my sister destroyed her marriage and she and her husband split, she ended up moving into an old trailer on our family property. She had $14,000 to her name from her half of the house sale when she and her ex split, manufactured home in a trailer park. After moving in, she was asked about getting a job. Then she'd get weepy and say she wanted to spend the summer with her kids, and couldn't imagine not having that time with them. We were like, "Okay, fair, but you'll get a job once the kids go back to school, right?" My sister promised she'd get that job once summer ended. Well, summer ended, and she didn't get the job. And when confronted again, she used crocodile tears and whined that she couldn't imagine being away from her boys, even though they were in school and she was just hiding in the old trailer all day or going out drinking with friends. This confrontation happened multiple times. Eventually, my sister spent herself into a hole and begged her soon-to-be ex-husband to get back together with her, so he moved into the trailer, but my sister told everyone it was his idea, and she even made him buy her a couple of dogs. She was also completely ungrateful when he bought her a refurbished fridge. Soon enough, he couldn't take it anymore and started house hunting. That's when my sister really had no choice but to finally get a job. My sister finally got a job to have her own income, and then she decided she wanted a brand new trailer. I didn't find out for years that she'd talked our grandparents into completely signing for the trailer's mortgage. My sister also had to get her water and power from my house, which is a sub-building I rent from our parents. Well, she doubled my electric bill and would pay me her half in cash. But she often delayed for months. People told me over and over again to shut her power off since she wouldn't pay. But my nephews were living in there with her 5 days a week. I couldn't cut the power and leave them cold. I was paying the power bill by check, and then my sister convinced me to pay it digitally through her phone, which took like 5 minutes each time it was done. And no matter what kind of day she had or was having, she'd hem or haw about paying the bill. It was out of my damn account, and I had to force her to get on her phone and do it almost every time. And then there was the money she owed me. In winter, she drove my bill up to over $500 a month. I'm on a fixed income, and that was basically half what I got a month back then. And she wasn't paying her half. So I started keeping a record on paper of how much she owed. She really didn't like finding out about that. Once I confronted my sister over how she kept going out to bars with friends and spending so much on booze and other things when she owed me hundreds of dollars. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm not changing my life for your sake." So I doubled down on making her pay me back. She owed me around $500 at the time and showed up at my door with a $100 bill and acted like that was enough. I took the $100 and said she had $400 left to pay. She looked at me like I had two heads and said, "But I paid you." And I said, "You made a payment. You didn't pay at all." She gave me that look like it didn't mentally compute and repeated, "But I paid you." And I had to tell her $100 is not $500. You still owe the rest. She frowned and walked off. I knew what she was doing. She was trying to shortchange me and make me call it even. But I didn't. Before long, I stopped paying the electric bill digitally and went back to paying with a check because my sister always made it such a pain. When my sister finally noticed, she was like, "Why would you pay with a check in the mail when we can just use my phone?" And I told her to her face that it's because she acted so dramatic every time it was time to pay and made it a complete hassle just to do it every month when it took so little time. She couldn't even retort, just looked away with a bitter face. She asked me the same thing one more time on another day, and I gave her the same reply. At this point, I think it was more about control than the money. My sister wanted me dependent on her. She went through a bad phase of trying to mom me after moving into the new trailer, and I had to tell her off for it. but she was also constantly trying to get me to pick her over our mother. Our last confrontation made it clear that was not going to happen. My sister eventually paid her debts to me off, but she racked them right back up again. Around this time, she had a terrible boyfriend that only made her worse. She wasn't paying her half of the power bill at all and just kept stalling whenever asked. Our mother got involved and had it out with her. She went down there and yelled at her that I'm on a fixed income and she was draining me financially. Soon I got a forced apology and a promise for repayment. She and her boyfriend paid me a few hundred and that helped get me through the holidays, but the debt was racked right back up again. My sister owed me a lot and then asked for a loan of $100 twice on top of it. She gave me that classic line drug addicts use, "You know I'm good to pay you back." She freaking wasn't. She was spending most of her money on drugs and booze. She didn't even buy winter clothes for her children. I had to buy them after my youngest nephew came to me in a t-shirt and shorts in 39 degrees. And not counting the $200 I spent on those clothes, and another $120 I gave her out of pity later, she owed me $800 and still does. That's money I'll probably never see again, but I'm not gonna forget it, that's for sure. The last time I saw my sister, we got in a shouting match. And among the things I yelled at her, I brought up the $800 she owes me. She made a shocked face that tells me she totally forgot, and then she quickly yelled about something else. It's not like she'll ever willingly pay it back. I've got no proof to take her to small claims court with either. Not that she has the money. She keeps moving to someplace else like every 6 months because she doesn't have a stable income. The thing that got my sister evicted from the family property was Thanksgiving 2023. We went out for Chinese food because no one wanted to cook, and my sister went to go gamble in the room with all those machines in the back by the bar. She spent most of the dinner back there and then came back bragging about how she'd won $130, and then dropped the money on the table in front of us with a big smile on her face. Never mind, she owed us all money. Me $800 and our parents and grandparents thousands. She made 2 payments to our grandparents after being evicted, and none of us have seen a dime from her since. That Thanksgiving at my sister smugly returned to the table, she started blatantly ignoring most of us. I tried to talk to her repeatedly, and our stepfather finally called her out. It resulted in a big scene, and my sister took her kids and stormed out. Our mother trailed after to try and calm her down, but my sister spit venom at her. Our mother finally hit her breaking point and told her she could get the hell off her property. She drew up a written eviction later. My sister left us with her trailer mortgage since her name wasn't on it and basically just walked away to go do drugs with her next boyfriend. The next one is an entitled people story. I worked at a residential care facility for adults with disabilities. The job involved supporting 6 residents who shared accommodations. It was shift work. During daytime hours, we maintained a ratio of 2 residents per staff member, with 1 staff member doing an overnight sleep shift. We operated on 4-week rotating schedules. My position was 0.75 FTE, meaning I worked 75% of full-time hours, which came to 57 hours per fortnight. The shifts were challenging, but the compensation made it worthwhile. I was assigned to a house we called Sunrise. Sunrise housed 4 residents and had 7 staff members. Each house had its own supervisor who reported to a district manager overseeing 6 houses, and the district managers reported directly to the CEO. According to company policy, leave requests operated on a first-come, first-served basis, requiring early submission to secure time off. In 2023, I was transferred to Sunrise from a larger facility due to my qualifications and circumstances I'm not at liberty to discuss. I spent my first year getting acquainted with the staff, residents, and house supervisor. There was an obvious clique of 4 staff members who had a pattern during school holidays. 3 would request leave while 1 would conveniently fall sick with a medical certificate covering the same period. They rotated who played the sick role to avoid detection. These individuals were friends outside work who frequently socialized together. Have you noticed how they always manage to get the same time off? Another coworker once whispered to me during a shift change. After a year, our house supervisor became ill. One of the clique members, let's call her Rachel, was appointed acting supervisor, and everything went downhill from there. She attempted to reduce my hours to give her friend more time. During a tense conversation, I firmly stated, "I'm contracted for 57 hours per fortnight, and that's what I expect to work. We need to be flexible with scheduling," she responded dismissively. In January 2024, I submitted leave for the March school holidays. Rachel rejected it, claiming others had already requested that time. Later, I discovered those others were all her clique members. "You understand how it works, a first come, first served," she said with a smirk. In March, I checked the leave calendar for the June holidays. It was completely empty. I submitted my request, only to have it rejected again. Rachel claimed, "Sorry, you were too slow. The others already submitted their requests." The following day, their names mysteriously appeared on the calendar. Come May, I tried for Christmas leave. Same result. This particularly frustrated me as I had family vacation plans. When I approached the district manager, who was also part of their social circle, I was told nothing could be done. At this point, I hadn't taken any leave in 2 years. In January 2025, while the clique was away, we faced a gastroenteritis outbreak across our facilities, leaving us severely short-staffed. All available personnel, including the CEO, were covering shifts. During one shift with the CEO, he noticed my situation. "You've accumulated quite a bit of leave. You should take some time off." "I've tried 3 times in the past year," I explained. "All rejected because others apparently got in first." "Let's fix that right now," he said decisively. "What dates are you looking at? How about 4 weeks over Christmas?" The CEO signed my leave form immediately and updated the calendar. He placed the application in Rachel's mailbox, buried under a stack of papers. That night, during my sleep shift, I made a copy for myself, knowing it might come in handy. In March, I discovered my Christmas leave had vanished from the calendar, replaced by Rachel and her friends. I remained quiet, knowing I had the CEO's signature as backup. In October, after our original supervisor passed away, Rachel was made permanent supervisor by the district manager, subject to a 3-month probation period. When December arrived, Rachel called me on my first leave day. "Where are you?" she demanded. "On approved leave." "I never approved any leave. Get to work immediately." When I arrived, she berated me. "You know we always take 2 weeks during December and January. Consider this a formal warning for insubordination." I worked the shift, then emailed the CEO. At our subsequent meeting, "CEO, explain what happened." Rachel interrupted. "He took unauthorized leave." "Actually," I interjected, showing my copy of the form, "the CEO approved this in January." The truth unraveled quickly. Rachel had destroyed leave forms and manipulated the calendar. The CEO investigated thoroughly, resulting in Rachel losing her promotion and the clique being separated into different houses. The CEO implemented new leave policies requiring his signature on all requests. 2 weeks later, Rachel was terminated for failing compliance requirements. The next one is an entitled people story. It all started when my dad passed away 3 years ago. He was only 62, and it hit our family hard, especially my mom, who had been with him for almost 40 years. Dad had always been careful with money and had built up a decent nest egg over the years. Nothing crazy, but enough that my mom wouldn't have to worry about finances after he was gone. Dad had used the same lawyer, Mr. Richards, for decades. He handled everything from the purchase of our family home to setting up Dad's will. Mom always described him as stuffy but competent, which seemed like a fair assessment from the few times I'd met him. He had that typical lawyer vibe, always in an expensive suit, spoke in complicated sentences, and had an office that smelled like leather and pretentiousness. After Dad died, Mom naturally went to Mr. Richards to handle the estate. I offered to come with her to the initial meeting, but she insisted she could handle it. "I've been dealing with him for 30 years, honey. I'll be fine." Looking back, I should have insisted harder. About a month after that meeting, I noticed Mom seemed stressed when I called to check in on her. She brushed it off as just paperwork stuff and changed the subject. This happened a few more times until finally, during a Sunday visit, I found her crying at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of her. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, sitting down next to her. She wiped her eyes and looked at me with this defeated expression I'd never seen before. "I think I'm in trouble, honey." Over the next hour, she explained what had been happening. Mr. Richards had informed her that there were complications with Dad's estate. Apparently, there were tax issues that Dad had allegedly been hiding, and if they came to light, the IRS would take everything and possibly pursue criminal charges posthumously, which would affect Mom as his spouse. But Mr. Richards had a solution. For a consulting fee of $25,000, he could make these problems go away. Mom, terrified of losing everything and having Dad's name tarnished, paid him from her emergency savings. A month later, more complications arose. Another $30,000. Then another $40,000 a few weeks after that. Every time the threat was the same: pay up or face financial ruin and public humiliation. "How much have you paid him in total?" I asked, my blood beginning to boil. Mom looked down at her hands. $215,000, she whispered. I nearly fell out of my chair. That was almost half of what Dad had left her. "And he's asking for another $75,000 now," she added. "I don't have it. I'll have to sell the house." That was the breaking point for me. "Don't give him another cent," I said. "This isn't right. Dad was meticulous with his taxes. You know that. This sounds like blackmail." Mom was hesitant to believe Mr. Richards would do something so illegal. After all, he had been their trusted lawyer for decades. But I wasn't convinced. I asked to see all the correspondence she had with him, and what I found made me even more suspicious. There were vague references to tax discrepancies, but no specific details. No actual IRS documents. Nothing concrete that showed any real problems. I did some research and made a few calls to friends who worked in finance and law. None of what Mr. Richards was claiming made sense. The pieces weren't adding up. So I made an appointment with a different lawyer, Miss Patel, who specialized in estate law. I brought all of Mom's documents, and after reviewing everything, she confirmed what I suspected. "This is textbook extortion," Miss Patel said firmly. "There's no evidence of any tax issues. Your father's returns were in perfect order. Mr. Richards is taking advantage of your mother's grief and trust." I was furious, but also relieved to have confirmation. Now we needed to stop him and try to get Mom's money back. Miss Patel suggested we gather evidence before confronting him or going to the authorities. "We need to build a solid case," she explained. "Lawyers like Mr. Richards are good at covering their tracks." We decided on a plan. I would accompany Mom to her next meeting with Mr. Richards, pretending to be helping her secure the $75,000 he was demanding. Miss Patel helped us prepare, and we made sure to have a recording device ready, which was legal in our state for in-person conversations. The day of the meeting, I could tell Mom was nervous. Her hands shook as we walked into his plush office. Mr. Richards seemed surprised to see me, but quickly regained his composure. "Mrs. Thompson, I wasn't expecting company today," he said with a thin smile. "This is my son," Mom replied. "He's helping me with the finances now." Mr. Richards nodded stiffly. "I see. Well, as I explained on the phone, we need to resolve these final issues with the IRS. The $75,000 will cover the remaining tax liability and prevent any further investigation." I decided to play dumb. "Can you explain exactly what these tax issues are? I'd like to understand before we transfer such a large sum." He gave me a patronizing look. "It's quite complicated, but essentially your father had been improperly reporting certain assets. Nothing criminal, just oversights that need correction." "Do you have any documentation from the IRS about these issues?" I asked innocently. "That's not how these matters work," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "We handle these things quietly, before they become official problems. That's what your father paid me for all those years." "So there's no actual IRS investigation right now?" I pressed. His eyes narrowed. "Young man, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know how to protect my clients. Your mother understands the seriousness of the situation." I glanced at Mom, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "And if we don't pay?" I asked. "Then I can't protect you anymore," he said, leaning forward. "The IRS will come after everything. Your mother will lose the house, the investments, everything your father worked for. Is that what you want?" The conversation continued like this for another 20 minutes, with me asking increasingly specific questions, and Mr. Richards becoming more vague and threatening. By the end, we had him on record clearly implying that if we paid him, our problems would disappear, without any actual evidence that these problems existed in the first place. We left without giving him any money, promising to get the funds together soon. As soon as we were in the car, Mom broke down. "I can't believe it," she sobbed. "All these years we trusted him. Your father trusted him." I hugged her tightly. "It's not your fault, Mom. People like him count on that trust." The next day, we took our evidence to Miss Patel, who confirmed we had enough to go to the authorities. She helped us file a complaint with the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office. What followed was a whirlwind. The investigation revealed that Mr. Richards had been pulling this same scheme with at least 7 other widows and widowers in the past 5 years. He had extorted nearly $1.5 million in total, preying on vulnerable people who trusted him during their darkest moments. The case against him was solid, especially with our recording and the pattern of behavior established with other victims. When confronted with the evidence, 2 of his former assistants came forward with additional information about his schemes, hoping to avoid being implicated themselves. Mr. Richards was disbarred and charged with multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and professional misconduct. He tried to plea bargain, but the judge wasn't having it. Given the number of victims and the calculated nature of his crimes, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. As for Mom's money, we were able to recover about $180,000 of it through the legal process. His assets were frozen and liquidated to repay his victims. It wasn't everything, but it was something. The whole ordeal took about 18 months from when I discovered what was happening to when Mr. Richards was sentenced. During that time, I watched my mom transform from a victim back into the strong woman I'd always known. She became an advocate, connecting with the other victims and even speaking at a conference about elder fraud. "Your father would be proud of us," she told me after the sentencing. "He always said you should stand up to bullies." I nodded, thinking about how Dad had always taught me to do what's right, even when it's hard. "He would be prouder of you, Mom. You're the one who had the courage to come forward." She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it reached her eyes. "Maybe. But I couldn't have done it without you." As we walked out of the courthouse that day, I realized something important. The money had mattered, yes, but what mattered more was that we had stopped someone who was hurting people. Mr. Richards had counted on shame and fear keeping his victims quiet. He never expected someone to fight back. Sometimes I think about him sitting in his prison cell wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his fancy suits, and I don't feel bad at all. He betrayed his profession, betrayed people's trust, and caused real harm to families like mine who were already suffering. 12 years doesn't seem long enough. Mom is doing well now. She still lives in our family home and has become quite the social butterfly in her retirement community. She tells me she sleeps better knowing that Mr. Richards can't hurt anyone else. As for me, I've learned to be more skeptical, to ask more questions, and to trust my instincts when something doesn't feel right. But most importantly, I've learned that standing up to corruption, no matter how powerful the person is always worth it. So if you're reading this and facing something similar, don't stay silent. Speak up, fight back. You might just save not only yourself but others who don't yet have the strength to stand up for themselves. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About 15 years ago, I was almost 20 and in my country's equivalent of a trade school for electricians. One of our teachers, electronic circuits class, had a kinda annoying catchphrase for every question students had. "No problems, just look in your textbook." He had already mentally checked out since he got a way better job lined up for next semester, so he pretty much only read stuff from the textbook and then switched to the textbook's practical exercises, where we had a breadboard and, working in pairs, inserted resistors, capacitors, and other components in it. All in all, not the worst teacher we had, but this one incident made his class very memorable. On the third class we had with that teacher, first one was introduction, second one was how to read resistor color codes. He said his catchphrase no less than 5 times per class. My friend showed me a glaring mistake in the textbook's practical exercise. It was something very simple, placing 3 resistors in series, measuring the current produced with a 24V DC power supply, and comparing to the value we had calculated. The first 2 exercises were okay, but in the third one, the values for all resistors were way too low, like 3 orders of magnitude low. Somebody meant to write 10K, 10 O, but typed 10O instead for every single resistor in that exercise. For people who are not very familiar with electronics, Ohm's law dictate that for a constant voltage supply, current gets higher as resistances get lower. Voltage equals sign resistance X current, or V equals sign RXI, which can also be written as I equals sign VR. Joule's law dictate that more power, which in a resistor's case would be dissipated as heat, is supplied the higher is the current. Power equals sign resistance X current 2, or P equals sign RXI 2. Resistors have a power rating measured in watts, and when the rating is exceeded, they start to produce smoke and or fire. The power rating for the resistors we were using was 0.25 W. When resistors are placed in series, their total value is added. In this example, 3 10O resistors would have a total resistance of 30O. If we use the previous formulas, we get a value of 0.8A for current and 19.2W for power, or almost 77 times the power rating of the resistors. If the 10KO resistors were used, we'd have 0.8 MA for current and 19.2 MW for power, well within the power rating of the resistors. My friend, I, and a few other students tried to ask the teacher if those values were correct, and his answer, to no one's surprise, was, "No problems, just look in your textbook." I tried to argue that the textbook was plain wrong, and he shut me down saying how way smarter people than him and I wrote the textbook, so we should just follow it. So everyone, some more reluctantly than others, placed the resistors in the breadboard, connected the power supply, and waited for his instruction to turn it on, as has been for the first 2 exercises without incident. Then he said to turn on the power supply, without even looking in the textbook. At first everything seemed fine, and some people started to get their multimeters. A few seconds later, a girl screamed, "Fire," but it was really only smoke. A few seconds later, and now we had small fires all over the lab and people freaking out. Nothing spectacular, and they died down a few seconds later, but enough to make most of the 30 people scream and panic, while the smell of burnt plastic from 15 breadboards and burnt ceramic from 45 resistors made the air pretty much unbreathable. To his credit, the teacher engaged the lab's circuit breaker pretty fast and evacuated the room so no one breathed potentially toxic fumes. Since I was expecting it, I was more annoyed than scared, unlike some of the more sensitive people who were crying, and told the teacher, who was looking at the empty lab as if he was seeing ghosts, "There seems to be a problem. Should you look in the textbook now?" He gave a nervous laughter and said, "Maybe you're smarter than the people who wrote it." The screaming attracted a more experienced teacher who, after making sure everyone was okay, just couldn't stop laughing at our teacher. He did keep using his catchphrase, "No problems, just look in your textbook," until the end of the semester, but he was now also looking in the textbook himself and spotted a few glaring mistakes made by those intelligent people. For some reason, he didn't seem to like the nickname we gave him when he heard someone saying in the hallway, "Next is Textbook Idiots class." The next one is an entitled people story. So a few years back, I had a couple of businesses. One where I was a virtual assistant doing graphic design, websites, marketing, admin, bookkeeping, photo and video editing, social media, resume writing, recruitment, HR, and ops. The list went on. I also had a weddings and event business where I had a photo booth, event hire, and a team of photographers, videographers, and event planners. I'll start with the weddings and events business. I had so many family and friends reach out to me, wanting my photo booth for free for birthdays, engagements, weddings, housewarmings, a piss-up on a Saturday night. Originally, I only offered to do digital only, so there wouldn't be any costs for me being the photos to be printed out, just pics posted with my watermark on my social media page. These were the conditions of using it for free. I would use these freebies to trial props, signs, different backdrops, etc., take photos for social media as well as videos and see what worked and what didn't. Soon after, though, it got a bit too popular with friends and family, even getting to the point I had more free bookings than paid, and they all thought that digital only just wasn't the same as a regular photo booth, and people really needed the prints to be included. I said sure. If they pay for the paper, which wasn't cheap at all, and they would scoff and say that I should include it at my own cost. I'm a business, you can claim it on tax or small tax business hack, gibberish tip here, and if I really want a good review, or for them to promote my business, I'd provide it. I did end up caving, and they never did end up posting a review or promoted it. Then people wanted me to remove my watermarks on the photos, and if I didn't, they would just crop them out themselves, to which I would happily comment on their posts, reminding them that this photo was taken by Attic Business name here. Then DM them saying, as per the terms you agreed and signed, please be sure to tag us if it just so happens you can't keep the OG size of the photo, and you had to crop it. If it was the person who booked it, they would have to fill out paperwork for it, and if it was a guest of theirs, I would have a big sign saying, if you take a photo in the booth, you agree for it to be shared on my business social media and website, no cropping photos or removing my watermarks. When some friends of friends got married, they would reach out and invite me out for brunch, wanting to catch up, only to tell me they are engaged and are planning their engagement and wedding and need advice and the lowdown on all the vendors and who I recommend, who's the cheapest, etc. Now, originally I'd give a little bit of my resources away, refer a few people I enjoyed working with before, venues that I thought they'd enjoy, then, when it came to talk to them about their budgets for what I could offer and provide, only for them to tell me that they've already booked photo, video, and event hire elsewhere. Just feel free, bring along the photo booth as part of your wedding gift to us. They still wanted us to pay $300 to $500 cash as well. And the venue is going to set it all up while their sister, who usually was a bridesmaid MOH, would be their day of coordinator, because why pay me to do something they've already organized? But I'd usually end up having the bride's appointed planner find out that I'm a planner stylist day of or at the hen's party or engagement and would wind up handballing it to me, then claiming the credit of C. Then there are those that wanted me for my services, told me because they have family overseas or their budget on XYZ has blown out that they really can't afford to spend any money on someone to help plan for now, but they saw my work and would love it if I could help them because they have no idea and they would be just so grateful. Some did barter services, not all, but some in OFC I couldn't say no on being a part of their big day. One wedding I did the styling, planning, and coordination. Her hen's party organized a surprise video from her family in Europe who couldn't come and edited it and played it at the wedding dinner. I was up nearly 24 hours that day. Another bride friend of mine, I did her wedding and her hen's do, and on the lead up to both, she would always have meetings, planning stationery, seating plans, food. She was vegan. We'd go to IKEA heaps just to get ideas. I'd show her my supplier's products to give her ideas on things to buy. I bought arbors, fabric specifically for her day, which I could use again. and so much more. Her days were beautiful. This was another very long day as well, and all I got were a set of cheese knives for my efforts. My business cards always disappeared when I tried to leave them out for promo. The absolute worst, though, was a mutual friend of a friend. She was my very first photo booth booking for pre-drinks before a festival when I first started out, and the photos from that day were so great I still used them on my socials and website years later. She had her engagement party, not long after I left my DV marriage because I caught him cheating on me going to sex clubs, seeing swears, seeing a mistress, and being obsessed with a swear. She originally messaged me about 8 months before her big day and asked me for another freebie. She wanted to do digital only again and whatever I could do to make it free because she just opened her own small business and didn't have much money to spend, which I had helped her set up also. I created the website, forms, booking and appointment stuff which she paid me for and gave me free sessions on top. I agreed since she paid for her other business, which was worth way more, and gave me some free beauty treatments in return on top. Now, when I got kicked out of my Marshall home by my abusive ex-husband about 5 months later, I was scrambling to find a place to live, find a lawyer, a full-time job to pay for said divorce lawyer, all while dealing with my POS ex, taunting me and bad-mouthing me all over social media and spreading lies and causing me to be sent to hospital multiple times. Not a grippy sock vacation. My body shut down due to stress and I stopped eating, LOL. Due to my very public humiliation, homelessness, my ex trying to either unalive me or make me unalive myself or die of embarrassment from his posts, stress, and the fact I had bigger things to deal with than a free photo booth booking that I never received any signed forms for, nor even an invitation. I had forgotten about it completely. She knew exactly what was going on, saw all the posts my ex made, even commented on a few, shocked that I was putting him through hell and siding with him. I later found out. She knew I had been in hospital, knew I wasn't doing too well, but didn't even reach out once to see if I was okay or to touch base on her day. Just assumed I'd show up. Instead, she just messaged me on the day 2 hours before asking where TF I was to set up. Now, admittedly, I feel a little bit bad about missing this. However, after COVID, I wasn't trying to get a lot of bookings and didn't have any but hers on the books anyways. She never sent back the forms, despite following up twice and getting empty promises, and after being kicked out and left on the streets, I was dealing with a lot and just wasn't coping, and paperwork for a free gig wasn't top of my list of things. Our mutual friend, who was very supportive, had told her what was going on and told her not to expect me to come, let alone bring the photo booth, because I wasn't doing well in between working 3 different jobs, running the businesses, being in and out of hospital because I wasn't able to eat without vomiting or pain, and my body was shutting down, fighting my demons while being publicly humiliated on social media by my ex, who was feeding everyone lies and trying to ruin what little life I had left. What do you think? Entitled? Or did she have grounds? Anyways, these are just a few of my weddings and event stories, and they don't even mention the professional networking charity events or random strangers who were itching for freebies either. I'll post those later tonight, and maybe I'll post my VA stories for you too. Anyway, thank you for watching.